The story of Saudi Prince Al-Wali was a painful shock for millions who believed he would one day open his eyes. After 20 years in a coma, the sleeping prince, as people called him, never regained consciousness. But there is a woman who was more fortunate. After a terrible car crash, Munira Abdullah fell into a coma for almost 30 years. People called her the sleeping beauty of the Emirates. Doctors weren't sure she would survive. But then something incredible happened. What exactly was this tragedy? What did Munira feel while in a coma? Could she hear the people around her? How did the miracle happen? And how is she living now? Watch the full video to hear this heartbreaking story. Let's begin. This tragedy, which divided the life of a regular Emirati family into before and after, happened back in 1991. Munira Abdullah, a resident of Abu Dhabi, was 32 years old when the accident happened. That day, she was on her way to pick up her 4-year-old son, Omar, from school. A relative offered to help her. He was the one driving when their car collided with a bus. Munira and her child were sitting in the back seat. When she realized the crash was unavoidable, she hugged her son tightly. As a result, little Omar only had a bump on his head. He managed to crawl out of the wrecked car, but his mother was left inside unconscious and trapped between the seats. Back then, there were no mobile phones, so they couldn't call for help. She remained in the car for several hours with no assistance. When doctors finally brought her to the hospital, they said there was no chance of saving her. But the family decided to do everything they could. They rushed her to London for treatment. There, doctors diagnosed her with a vegetative state. Their verdict was hopeless. Munira would never regain consciousness. But they were wrong. What happened next will move you to tears. Munira was brought back home to the United Arab Emirates. For many years, she stayed in different hospitals. She was connected to life support machines, fed through a tube, and given physical therapy to keep her muscles from breaking down. Doctors said there was no hope, but the family never gave up. From the very beginning, her husband stayed by her side. He took care of little Omar and his sisters twice a week. The whole family would visit the hospital to read prayers, share news, and simply be near her. For them, it became a sacred ritual, an act of love and faith. But when Omar turned 18, he made a decision that changed everything. He took full responsibility for his mother's care. Omar moved into the hospital. He worked during the day and slept on the bed next to hers at night. On weekends, he washed her clothes, monitored her condition, and spoke with doctors. He became her eyes, her hands, her voice, but most of all her heart. He talked to her every single day. He shared his problems and joys, told her about what was happening in the lives of his 2 sisters. He spoke about world events, and he asked her to pray for him. As the boy grew up, Munira's condition didn't improve. Doctors were honest. After so many years, there was no point in hoping for a recovery. But Omar's grandparents kept telling him, nothing is impossible for God. Even if doctors give up, you don't. So, how did this woman eventually come back to life? And did she really hear everything that was happening around her all that time? In the spring of 2017, something unexpected happened. The tragic story of Munira reached the crown prince, now ruler of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. He gave the family a grant for treatment abroad. It was the first real chance they had in many years. Munira was taken to Germany to a clinic near Munich. There, doctors decided not just to maintain her condition, but to try and improve it. They performed surgery to restore muscles that had atrophied from lack of movement. Physical therapy, fresh air walks, even bird songs. They tried everything to stimulate her brain. A year later, during the final week of treatment, a miracle happened. It all started when an argument broke out in the hospital room between Omar and the clinic staff. The voices were raised. At that moment, Munira began to make some sounds. I think she felt I was in danger and tried to help me, Omar said. Doctors immediately ran some tests, but didn't see any changes. But 3 days later, something happened that shocked everyone. One morning, her son woke up to someone calling his name. He looked around, but no one was there. Only later did he realize it was her. It was his mother. Omar, her son's name, was the first word she said after 27 years of silence. It was the voice he had dreamed of hearing his entire life. He cried with joy, couldn't believe it was real, and even asked the doctors if he was dreaming. The doctors confirmed she had started speaking. One of them later said, "None of us had ever seen someone wake up after 27 years. It was like a miracle." Munira Abdullah's story shocked not only the doctors, but the entire world. A woman who had spent nearly 3 decades in a coma had regained her voice, her awareness, and the ability to pray. When Munira began to talk, her son asked her a question that had haunted him for years. What does a person in a coma feel? Can they hear what's happening around them? Or are they just asleep? The answer was unexpected. Yes, I heard you, Munira said. She had heard everything going on around her. She understood everything people said about her, everything related to her family and their prayers. But random conversations about news, sports, and other topics seemed not to reach her. It was as if she had been living in her own world, choosing what to hear and what not to. But what amazed the doctors the most was something else. Before falling into a coma, Munira knew the Quran by heart. And after waking up, she continued to recite its verses just like before. Doctors said, "We couldn't believe that someone who hadn't spoken for 27 years could remember all that instantly." Today, Munira is back home living in Abu Dhabi. She is partially paralyzed, moves around in a wheelchair, but she can say the names of her loved ones, say prayers, and talk a little with people. She fell into a coma at the age of 32 and woke up at 59. She was a young woman when it happened, and she woke up an older one. Time passed, the world changed, her son grew up, while her own life had been on pause. After waking up, she underwent several surgeries and continues her physical therapy. Doctors see progress, but they say the road ahead is still long. Her son, Omar, now 38, works as a civil servant and is still by her side. In an interview, he said, "I told my story to the media for one reason, to give people hope, so they won't believe their loved ones are lost forever, even if they're in a hopeless condition." Omar's interview spread across the world. On social media, people left tens of thousands of comments. "I would kiss this mother's hand. I would hug her. This is a miracle no one will forget." This was the story of a mother who gave everything for her son. A mother is someone who's ready to sacrifice it all for her children. And the son, in return, devoted his life to taking care of her. Munira's story inspired thousands of people who have seriously ill relatives in their families. Her case is rare, but it reminds us even when doctors give up, we don't have to. Sometimes just being there is enough. Many also hoped that the sleeping prince of Saudi Arabia, who had spent 20 years in a coma, would one day open his eyes, too. The doctors and his father believing in a miracle.